Please remove any metallic items you're carrying, keys, loose change. Holy shit! Ugh. Back up! Stand back up!
Okay, so now we've got all our motion capture and our characters are set up. It's time to start bringing everything together and blocking out our sequence using MotionBuilder Story Tool. So Story Tool is a non-linear editor in MotionBuilder that allows you to create a story or a cutscene or a motion capture sequence like we're doing by adding animation clips onto a track along a timeline, the same way as you would if you were editing video in, say, Premiere or something. So the idea at this blocking stage is to use Story to create a rough cut of our sequence using unedited motion capture and a first pass of our camera animation. So this is going to let us make sure that we've captured everything that we need to capture, and also check what we're going to need to edit, and just as importantly what we're not going to need to edit because it'll never be seen. So I'm going to walk you through the cut that we've just seen, and I'll show you how to use Story to apply motion capture to your characters and then align them in the scene, and also how to set up and animate your cameras, including the camera cuts. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to need to start blocking this scene is a character. So we're going to merge in our Nigel character without any animation. Now the first thing we're going to do might seem a little bit weird, but we're going to Control A to show the skeleton, and I'm going to select the character's hips, and I'm going to set the Y value to -999. So what that's going to do is it's going to put our character way down here, far away from the center, out of the shot. I'll come back and I'll show you the reason I've done this. It'll all become clear in a moment. But for now we're going to go into Story. We're going to right click and insert character animation track, set our character to Nigel, and then in here we're going to right click and insert an animation file. So in this folder we've got this is all the mocap takes that I've selected, and then I've processed them to their correct characters. So we're going to take our first shot on Nigel, bring that in. So now we can see here we've got our character in the scene, and he's been animated by Story. So if we just scrub through this, you can see it animates our character, and then when the clip finishes, the character stays in position and is still before that as well. So the reason we set the hips to -999 is if we come down into this Story track and then we set the track to Passthrough, what this does is it tells MotionBuilder when there's animation in the track to use that, but when that animation finishes, go back and use the animation that's in the scene. In this case there's no animation in the scene, what we do have is that position, which is way down here out of shot. So what this allows us to do is, when we've got lots of characters in the scene, which we will have later on, and you don't want your characters in shot for certain parts, when we play our animation back, the characters are going to be in the correct position, but once his animation's finished, and he might not be in the next shot, he's going to drop down to this -999 position, which is going to be way out of camera shot, or he won't be in the way for any of the scenes. You won't have random characters popping up when they shouldn't do. If we did want this character to stay in position, what we can do is we can come down here and grab this little yellow triangle at the corner and pull this out. So what this does now is this tells MotionBuilder when there's animation, play the animation, and when there isn't any animation, just hold that last frame, and then when that finishes he goes back down to the offset position. And we can do the same at the start as well. So if I reset that there, if you wanted him to be in before the shot, we can grab this corner and then just drag that out. So now our character will be out of position, then he'll come into position for this first frame, and then he'll start animating, and then once his animation's finished he'll disappear again. So that's just a handy way of keeping your characters out of the way, especially, like I say, when you see later on when I've got multiple characters in and there's lots of different camera angles where characters could reappear in shots. It's any way of getting them out of the way so that you don't accidentally get them in shot. So now we've got a character. The next thing we need to do is add a camera. So we're going to come over here to Navigator. We're going to open up our cameras. We're going to right click and we're going to insert a camera. Now the first thing we can do is we can get rid of the camera interest. Just hit Control A so that we can see our camera. We can select our camera interest, right click, we can delete that because we don't need it. Then we're going to select our camera, right click, and we're going to zero it in the scene. So we can zero all the translation and rotation and hit F. Now we're going to be using this for playback, so I'm going to attach a video file to this. So what we don't want is for this camera to be in the shot. So we can use the same offset as we have for our characters, and we can set this to -999. Now, one thing we need to look here, if we look through the camera here, we can see our character. So if I just come back into story, you can see our character drops in and out of shot. What we're actually looking at there is the inside of our character. And then obviously when it moves out of the way, so that we don't have this flashing on and off all the time, it's not going to be in the render or anything, it just gets a bit distracting if you can see it moving around. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back into our camera, and then we're going to change the near far plane clip to 1. So now the draw distance on the camera's quite small, so you can't actually see the character, so you won't see him popping in and out. So like I say, you don't really need to do that, it's just less distracting if the background's not changing when you've got characters moving in and out of the same space. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change our background color to black. So we can just set this to 0. And then we're just going to turn off this little axis indicator down here in the corner, because we don't need that because the camera's not going to be moving. But we'll leave the camera label on so we know which camera it is. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our video to this background and use this as a playback camera. So we're going to come into File, we're going to import video, and we're going to import a video clip. Now for this, obviously I'm using the clip that I'm recreating in MotionBuilder, but you could use a video reference that you've shot, or it could be some storyboards that you've got timed out, or things like that. So you come down into video, we can find the video that we've just imported. We're going to left click, drag that onto the camera, let go, and then we're going to set this as the current camera foreground. So you can see we've got our camera and the video playing back in the shot. And then the last thing we need to do is just come back up here to our camera. We're going to just right click, and then we'll rename this to Playback, just so we know what the camera is. So now we've got our playback camera. The next thing we're going to need is a shot camera. So in the view window, if we do Control 2, it'll set up a 2-pane view like this. And then in the left hand side we can Control Q into perspective. And in the right hand side we're going to Control E into our playback camera. So now we've got 2 views set up. And then we're going to create our shot camera. So again, we're going to come back into cameras. We're going to right click and insert a camera. Again, we can get rid of that interest because we don't need that. Select our camera. We're going to right click and 0 all. Set our camera back in the scene. Now something I'm going to do to these cameras that you may or may not want to do is I'm going to change the rotation order on this camera. So if I just zoom in on this, we set this to R to rotate. If we come up here, we can set the rotation to additive. So what this does is it shows you the rotation order that the camera's already got. So the bigger the circle, the more influence it has. So if we start with Z, you can see when we rotate Z, all the other axes move. Then when we rotate Y, only X moves. And then the smallest one is X. When we rotate that, only X moves. Now the problem with the way it's set up at the moment is most of the actions that you do with the camera are going to be panning, and then there's going to be some tilting, and then least often is going to be the roll. So at the moment, the problem that we're going to have is if you pan this camera around, when you get to here, you can see now I can't tilt the camera because Z will roll it and X also rolls it. But if you're animating this with local rotation turned on, it looks like you can actually tilt this, but what happens is when you tilt it, you can see all 3 axes down here start to change, which is ideally not what you want. And it's also, if you've ever animated a camera before and then you go to play it back and it does this funny wobble where it starts doing things like this, it's usually because you've entered gimbal lock because of something like this, where you've run out of rotation axes. And also if you're trying to edit the F-curves, when you've got multiple axes going, it's a lot harder to figure out which one you need to change if you just want to tilt a camera up. So what I'm going to do is, we're going to take this camera, switch back to additive mode so you can see what we're doing. We're going to come down here into Properties, Degrees of Freedom, Rotation, and we're just going to enable Rotation Degrees of Freedom, and then we're going to change the rotation order, and we're going to change this to XZY. So the reason that I know that this is the right order is because if we look at the size of these rings, we can see if we pan the camera, the other 2 axes come along for the ride. So we're just going to be able to tilt and rotate our camera. Then if you want to tilt the camera, we can still tilt that, and you can see X moves then. And then if I want to roll it, I can still roll it. But then if I ever want to go back and just change the pan slightly, I can come back into Y and we can still pan and it won't mess up the other rotations. I can still tilt it slightly and it won't mess up the roll. And then finally I can roll or put it back to straight we're not going to have any problems with gimbal lock. So like I say, this isn't a necessary step, this isn't something you have to do. And if you are working on a project and you're using other software and things like that, always check that if you change the rotation order on your camera, it's not going to break everything else. Otherwise, you're going to animate everything with this rotation order. When you come to export it and put it into another piece of software, you'll find that your cameras don't work. Then you have to go back through and animate them all again, which is never a lot of fun. So always check, just do some quick animation on this camera, export it, put it into your target software, whatever you're going to do, and make sure that it works before you do this. But I know this is going to be fine, so I can carry on. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change some of these camera settings just to make it look more like this cinema camera we've got here. So the resolution we're going to change to a fixed ratio, and then this sort of CinemaScope ratio is 2.39. So now if we just control E into this camera, we can see what changes we're making. So now if I just change this background color, and we're going to make this grey. And so this is going to make it easier to see our characters, because a lot of our characters are dressed in black like this. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add these bars on, so we can use frame color. And then if we set this to black, then we can see our camera here looks very much like the film camera. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to come into advanced settings, and we can change the film format. We can change this to full aperture. We're not doing any camera matching, so it's not too important, but just to give us a similar sort of feel. And then down here we can change this to 27. We'll just put a standard 27mm lens on this. So this will change per camera, but just for now, just to give it a value, because a lot of this reading up was all shot on a lot of wide lenses because it's quite a small space. So we'll set this to 27 as a good sort of base wide angle to start with. So now we've got this camera set up. What this allows us to do is, when we want to do the next camera, rather than having to go through all this setup again, we can just come down here to our camera, and then we can duplicate it. And you can see we have a camera that's exactly the same. It's got all the same settings. All we need to do, like I say, is come back in here and change the focal length for a narrow or wider camera depending on what we need. So for now we can delete that. So we've got our camera. And then the last thing we're going to need is obviously some kind of environment. So we're going to file, merge in our environment without any animation. I'm going to be honest here, if you've come to find out about modeling tips, then you're sadly in the wrong place, because I've not modeled since about 2004 in Maya. So what I've built here is a very rough, sort of quick, 1 to 2 day sort of previs level environment based on what I've figured out from this video. But I think it'll do for what we need. So now we've got our environment, camera and character. We can start trying to match to what we've got in our scene. So the first thing we're going to need to do is find the right part of the animation in this clip. So I'm going to do this here because there's lots of space. So if we play this animation through, we can see our character's starting on his left foot, whereas the one that we've got is on his right foot, so we need to change that. So to do that, a lot like working with video clips, we can just simply left click and then drag this clip along till we find a frame that looks the same. So there he is stepping on his left foot, so now we know this is our start frame here. And then if we play this through, you can see our character stops here, whereas in the video he keeps going for quite a bit longer. So what we need to do is rescale our clip. So what we're going to do is we're going to find where the character ends, which is here, and then we can select our clip, and we're going to change this to from loop to scale, and then we can drag our clip and scale it up. So if we go back to the start now, we can see it's all out of sync again. So we'll drag through and find out where that foot falls for the first time, which is here. So we'll align that footfall again. So there it is in our take. And then we can put this back and then see how they line up for speed. You can see it's still moving too quickly. So we'll scale it out a bit more. And then we'll sync up that footfall again. And then play through. So now you can see we've got that clip pretty much timed to match the other one. So then we can take off loop and we can get rid of the frames that we don't need. Just drag the end in, and then same at the other end. We can go to the end of this clip. And then again, drag the end of the clip. You have to wait for the arrow to turn to that double-ended arrow, and then just drag that clip in. So now we've got the steps matching. We need to get it into the correct place in the scene. So to do that, we're going to select the clip, and we're going to come over here, we're going to turn on ghosts. So what this allows us to do is move this character around. So an important thing to remember when you start moving clips around is, if you've got the clip selected, before you start moving it, always come up into the viewer window and press Shift D. Because the thing with clips is, if you've got something selected in your scene and then you select a clip, it doesn't deselect the object in the scene. So then when you start moving this clip around, it'll start moving the object, and you can get into some weird double transformations in characters, or the camera will start moving, or you'll see a piece of scenery start moving. So always make sure you come up into the viewer, press Shift D to make sure everything's deselected, and then select your clip. It's a bit of a pain, but it's worse than actually doing it, moving something that you can't see in camera, and then finding out later on that you've actually moved half your scenery around while you thought you were just moving a character. So just get used to that, coming up into the viewer, Shift D to deselect everything, then select your clip. So now we can put our character back to the start, and then we can move him back up. So we want him to be up here by this revolving door, so we're going to move him back in Z. And then to frame him up, rather than hitting F, which is just going to place us down at the beginning of this clip, which is no use to us, we're going to Shift D to make sure everything's deselected. Then we can come back down here into our groups, and then we can select his skeleton down here and just hit F. And now we can focus in on him. So now we can get him in the right position in this doorway. So now we can move this clip into position. So again, in the view window, Shift D, select our clip, and then we can just grab the clip and just move him into roughly into position. So we'll start somewhere around here, and then we're going to try and position this camera on the first frame to match the shot in our playback window. So we're just going to come in here, we're going to Control A to hide the skeleton. Then we're going to try and match up this shot and angle in here. So let's go for something like this. And then in here we can Shift D to deselect everything. We're going to right click and select current camera, and we're going to set a flat key here. Then we can frame the clip in the transport controls. We're going to select the clip, we're going to right click and then hit frame start and end. So now we can play through our clip to the final frame. So we can drop this back by 1 just by left clicking in here and then dragging to the left. So that's now at the end. And now we could move our camera out and try and find this last position. Now, the problem is we've run into the bag scanner. So what we're going to do is we can Control Q into here, and if I hit F to frame, we can see our camera is actually inside this bag scanner, and so is our Nigel character. So what we'll do is we'll move this scanner out of the way. So if we Control W into the schematic view, in our lobby I've got the bag scanner here. So now on this frame I need to move it out of the way, but what I'm going to do first is I'm going to move to the next frame where I know it's going to be in the correct place, just set a flat key, and then we're going to come back in 1, and then on this frame I'm going to move it out of the way and set another flat key. So what that means is now when I switch to the next shot, that desk's going to pop back into position. So that's where we need it for the rest of the shots. So now if we play that back, when we do this first shot it's going to be out of the way, and as soon as we go into the rest of the shots it's going to be back in the correct position. So now we can set our camera to the last position, Control E back into our playback camera. So now we can move our camera back and try and get this same position in here. So if we move our camera back something like that, for now we can see our Nigel's not in the right position, but for now we're just going to select our current camera and we're going to put a key there, and then we can Shift D in the viewer to make sure nothing's selected, select our clip, and then we're just going to rotate it in Y to get it in roughly the right position, somewhere around here, and then we can play the animation back. So we can see the timing's right, but the framing's not quite right. We need to move our camera back, and also our camera's going up. So we can just reposition the camera. So then we just keep tweaking the position of this clip and the animation on the camera until we get something that matches our reference, like we have here. and then once we're happy with that, we can create a shot track. So to do that, we're going to right click in our viewer and select a camera, and then we're going to alt drag this into our shot track. So what shot track does is it tells MotionBuilder which camera it needs to be playing through. At the moment we've only got one camera, so it's not really going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to build this second shot. So to do that, we're going to Control 1 back into a single view, then we're going to Control Q back into perspective view. We can hide our lobby geo for now because we don't need that. And then merge in our guards. So now we're going to do the same thing with these guards. So we're just going to grab the hips and we're going to set these to -999. And then we're going to right click in story and insert a character animation track. And then we can set this to pass through and also show ghosts. We just move that out a bit. And then we can Control C to copy and then just paste two of those in for the other two guards. And then set the guards in the clip. And then we can come to the start of our animation. And then to import our animation this time, we're going to position our cursor in the right position. So what happens is if you use right click, insert animation file, it actually uses the current position of the pointer. So it's worth putting it in roughly the right place. Then we're going to right click, insert animation file. Then we're going to get our guard 1, guard 2, guard 3. And then we need our Nigel characters animation. So now we've got the animation in for all our characters. We're obviously going to need to put them in the right position because at the moment they're all around the center. So we're going to unhide our lobby sequence. Now to align Nigel, there's a shortcut we can do to get him into roughly the right position. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the clip. We're going to come up here into match, and then we're going to match object. We're going to use the hips, and we're going to match it to the previous clip. So we're going to match it to this one, and then we can use at end of previous clip, and then we're going to match the translation and the rotation. Just hit OK. So that puts him in roughly the right position. And then for the other two guards, we're just going to grab their clips and slide them up into roughly the right position. So he's on that side. Our second guards, we need to spin him around and then move him up somewhere over here. And then our third guard, he's actually facing that way. And then we can move him up the other end. And then same as we did before, we're just going to deselect everything. Just select Nigel's skeleton again, frame that. And we can come around here. And you can see here, because I put these doors in, you can't actually frame up very well on this. It doesn't give us a lot of room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide these doors for now. We're going to do the same thing as we did for the bag scanner and just move them out of the way for a frame and put them back in. So if we Control 2 to give us two views again, and then in this view we're going to hit Control W, and then in our lobby we've got the revolving doors. So I know in this shot they're in the right position, so we can set that to flat, and then on the next frame we want them to be out of the way. So we're going to move these back and set a flat key. So now we can see they jump out of position. Change the frame range. So they jump out of position the same way as they do with the desk. So now we're going to need a shot camera. So again, we're going to come back down here and we're going to go into our cameras. We're going to select our camera. Make sure nothing else is selected. Select our camera again. We're going to right click and duplicate. Now because there's animation on this, when we duplicate it, it duplicates the animation. So we need to make sure our camera, we need to remove this animation. So to do that, we're going to make sure our camera is selected. We're going to come up to animation. We're going to clear selected all properties. So this is going to clear the animation on the selected object, and it's going to clear all the properties. And click OK. So now there's no animation on this camera. Then we're going to right click the camera and make camera current. Obviously that's going to be in the same position as the last one finished. So we can spin round, and again we'll use our Nigel skeleton and frame up on that. So now we're going to try and recreate this same framing in here. So let's try a slightly narrower lens. Something like this, so we get the two scanners in. And you'll see here when he moves out of the way, we're pretty much lined up with these doors, so we're roughly in the center of the scene. So if I select current camera, then we can just zero this out, so he's roughly in the center, so the camera is roughly in the center of the scene. So you can see we've got something similar to this shot now. So I'm pretty happy with that framing. So now we can start moving our characters into position. So we'll go back into story. So we can select our Nigel character. Don't forget to Shift D to make sure nothing else is selected. I'm going to select Nigel's clip, and we're just going to drag him backwards closer to camera. Somewhere around here. And then move him across into the center. And then change his rotation slightly. So there's a bit more square on. And just bring this camera up slightly. Something like that. And then we can move our guards into position. So we're going to start with guard 1. So he can move a little bit more out, somewhere around here. Same with guard 2. And then we just need to move guard 3 so he's framed nicely in this scanner. So now we can select our camera and create a flat key there because I like this framing. You can see the camera starts moving around there, so we're probably not too far away from where the camera starts moving. But what I need to do is find this point here so our character starts moving at the same time as the character in the clip. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the clip to bring up the asset settings. Then I'm going to hold Control, just move this window out of the way. So what this means is if you hold Control and move a window in MotionBuilder, it means it doesn't do the crazy docking thing where it ends up squashed in some point where you can't really use it. So if you hold down Control, you can move a window around and reposition it without it docking anywhere. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to use this first loop. So what this does is it changes the start position. So rather than having to go through here and find the bit where he actually starts walking and then cut that and then move this clip back, another way to do it is we can leave our clip where it is, drag this window back down, and then we can go to this first frame and we can change this first loop. So this actually changes the position, the start of the animation in the clip, and we can start dragging this to the left until he starts to move. So you can see there he starts to move to the left. So now they're in sync. So that just means I don't have to go in here and start trying to move this clip around in some way and then reposition it. So on here it's not too bad because you've got no clips after it, but when you've got a whole timeline full of clips, this is a really easy way of readjusting the start position on a clip without having to move the actual clip itself around. We can just come in here, go back to that first frame, we can just come in here and just move this around till we find the bit that we want. So now we can see he's roughly got the right timing, but he's a little bit out of position. So again in here we can alter that. So you can come back to this first position and just check that, so we can move him a little bit more off center, maybe a little bit further forwards, and then also as he begins to walk we can obviously change the angle of his walk and move him out away from that scanner. So all of the things that you do by actually dragging the clip and then moving the ghost, you can actually use these settings in here to do it on the clip itself. So it's just another way of adjusting the position of your animation clip if you don't want to use the manipulator, or if like here you want to stay in the camera view, you don't want to be going out and trying to do it in another window, you can actually do fine adjustments really here. So and then once we've got something that looks roughly right, we can close that. And then we're just going to play this back and try and match this camera move. And then once we're happy with the animation of our character and camera, we can come back to the start of this clip. And then we're going to right click and select current camera, and then alt left click drag that into the shot track and just extend that out so that it covers the animation. And then in here, rather than being in the camera, we're going to Control I into the camera switcher. And what this does is, as you pass over these clips, it then tells MotionBuilder which camera to be playing back through. So we can see here clip 1, shot 1 is camera, and then clip 2 shot 2 is camera 1. So as MotionBuilder plays this back, when it goes across this shot track, when it goes across the clip, it'll switch to the next camera. So now we use the same process to create the rest of the shots, adding in the rest of the characters, all the animation, the rest of the cameras, and matching them up, and just build out the rest of the shots until you end up with something like this. So you can see here we've got our shot track, we've got all our cameras in here and all the different clips, we've got all the different characters, we've got all their animation and motion capture assigned to them. So as this plays back, you can see MotionBuilder will play through all the different cameras, matching to what we need, and all the animations timed out to match the clips. So just to give you an example of how that pass-through worked, where we set all the characters' hips to -999, if we come down here to our Tracy character, if we turn off pass-through, you can see she appears, because this is her start position way down here towards the end of the sequence, where she comes in and shoots the guard. If we don't set her track to pass-through, you can see she appears in quite a few of the shots. Now, the only other way of doing that obviously would be to put in a clip or add something in to move her out of the way. But by setting her to pass-through, you can see she only actually appears in the shots that she needs to be. And then in the other shots, she's not there. So the last thing we're going to look at is how to fix these nasty mocap paddle hands. So because we've not captured any fingers, because the MVN system doesn't capture fingers, or I didn't have the gloves on to capture fingers, we've got these mocap paddle hands where the fingers are completely flat. So to fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to come into our Nigel character, we're going to right click and insert a Subtract character additive, and then in here we're just going to turn this on to accept keys. We're going to Control Q into our perspective view, come down to our Nigel character. So just to make this a little bit clearer, because we've got a lot of characters and you can see it gets quite confusing in here, what we can do is we're going to hit solo, so that's going to hide everybody else. So now we can see Nigel a lot clearer. And we're also going to turn off ghosts, and then we can come in here and we're going to grab his fingers and go into local mode. Then we're just going to rotate these into a relaxed hand pose. Make sure accept keys is turned on, and then just flat key that, and then we can rotate the thumb. And then do the same on the other hand. And then set a key on that. So now we've got this relaxed hand pose. Obviously it's only over only on one frame, so as soon as that moves it goes off. So what we can do is, if we just deselect everything, we can see that creates a little clip here. If we grab this, we can extend this out and basically say we want this clip to be applied over the entire animation. So we can just drag that out, and then that'll apply that hand pose all the way across the different animations. And then because these characters all use the same skeletons, we can also take him off solo so all the others appear. And then because all these characters use the same skeleton, we can just come to another character, we can insert a Subtract character additive, and then in here we can just copy and paste that clip, and we can see our guard now has relaxed hands. So we can do that for the rest of the characters. So now you can see when we play our animation back, even in the shadows, he's got a nice relaxed hand pose. All the characters have this nice relaxed hand pose rather than the strange looking paddle hands that they had before. And although they don't fit every situation and every shot, they're a lot less distracting than the strange looking straight hands. So this is a quick example of how you can use Subtract to adjust your animation by applying like a layer over the top of it. So now we've got our sequence all blocked out in Story. In the next video we'll look at how to edit it using a control rig. So don't forget to subscribe if you want to see that, and I'll see you in the next video.